All right, Neale, he's going to be talking about neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and storytelling, and that is really at the center of the presentation.
Enormous, instantaneous. All the presenters who've gone before have kind of covered some of the basic ideas I want to talk about. So just sort of starting, my background is a little bit eclectic. So I was a psychiatric hospital administrator before going back to school and getting a PhD in marketing. And a lot of what I've been doing over the last 20 years has been to update marketing with the ideas of updated ideas of neuroscience and cognitive psychology. And I'm also a storyteller. This is my the Catastrophe Theory is my first novel, which just came out. And the book on the right, the yellow book, Habit, the 95% of behavior marketers ignore, was that first effort to, in my ongoing task of taking marketing into a more behavioral framework, which I call integrated behavioral marketing. And the middle graphic is the model of human behavior that I crafted that really tries to take into account the new understanding that the unconscious brain is really the primary driver of everything we do, and the idea that the unconscious mind is doing most of the work. And that really gets into the idea of storytelling and why storytelling is so important. And I illustrate this and try to get people to really grasp it because I think it's so counterintuitive. But the idea of when we drive a car and we're surrounded by people going, 60, 70, 80 miles per hour, everybody's going different speeds, changing lanes, people talking on phones, listening to the radio, all these different things are going on. And your mind is processing this.
Are you an entrepreneur struggling to stand out in a crowded market? Your secret weapon is your story. Discover how to make your competition irrelevant by owning your story. Want to learn more? Check out our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-week training to reshape your narrative. The link is what you see on your screen, academy.aclasses.org/story. Now back to the conversation.
All of this activity at an unconscious level. Your conscious brain simply cannot react fast enough to handle it. But your unconscious mind takes all of these pieces of information in, but it's nonverbal. And so it influences how we drive by saying, yeah, that feels like that's the right distance between me and the car in front of me. And that feeling is incredibly powerful. And I think we just take it for granted. And yeah, I think this is kind of the sine qua non of human existence, that we are always doing this. We're always taking in all of this information at an unconscious level and intuiting from that what our behavior should be. And a large part, and some of the other presenters have kind of mentioned this idea of the hippocampus and the amygdala, and my graphics got messed up there. But the hippocampus is actually, the arrow should be pointing to the bottom part of this part of the brain called the limbic system. And it's hippocampus means seahorse, and you can kind of twist your eyes a little bit. You can maybe see that structure looks like a seahorse. But all memory gets filtered through the hippocampus, but right at the end of the hippocampus, that little bulb at the end, the amygdala, which is means almond, that almond-shaped thing at the tip of the hippocampus, is where we process strong emotions. And so you're driving, you're processing all this information unconsciously. You get this perception like this is the right distance in front, between me and the car in front of me. And if your spouse is driving, let's say your spouse is like 10% closer, you experience that as anxiety. You experience that often in ways that you're very uncomfortable in that situation. And that's how the brain works. And if you had like an accident or a near accident or something really emotionally unsettling happened, your amygdala would kick in, and then that would encode that experience into your long-term memory. And so this idea that this is what the brain is doing all the time in human interactions, when you're shopping, when you're working, when you're walking down a crowded street, I think is the biggest revolutionary idea is kind of starting with Damasio's book Descartes' Error, and then Kahneman and Tversky's work with Kahneman summarized, and Thinking Fast and Slow. And so for me, the idea that, and several of the presenters I think have done such an excellent job in pointing this out, it's that the story, the narrative connects all of these ideas together in a way that makes it possible to communicate to other people what happened in a way that evokes an emotional response. And this idea that the mind, which is so fantastically complicated, and whenever we use any kind of metaphor to try to explain it, I think Gunnar kind of got at that earlier. When we use computers as a way to, as an analogy, but we've done it before. When we started really developing a knowledge of electricity, we thought of the brain in terms of electrical circuits. Well, before that, when we were, dealing with pumps and, physical machines, we thought of the mind that way. But all of these ideas are incredibly overly simplistic, because the mind itself is so incredibly complicated. You have 85 billion neurons. Each neuron is connecting to 10,000 other neurons. So you really have more neural connections in your brain than there are stars in the Milky Way. And these numbers are so astronomical that they themselves kind of lend our understanding to relying on these narratives and these metaphors. So the idea of that how the brain works with all of this effort going on is that it ends up taking about 20% of the body's energy goes to just running the brain, and that's base load. If you have a lot of executive level effort, it increases the overall amount of energy that your brain is using. And I think this is what makes narrative so critical to civilization, is that the narrative helps us understand complicated things in ways that aren't overwhelming to our minds, that don't take up too much space. And we talk about the structure of the mind, the prefrontal cortex is kind of where the conscious brain does its work, and it's pulling ideas together. And so if those ideas aren't coherently linked to each other, then it's very hard to make sense out of all of these separate, disparate ideas, facts, experiences. And this, I think, is critical for us to understand that when we are trying to get people to understand a brand, to understand our personal brand, to understand who we are, we're always seeking ways to simplify that. And so even the narrative itself is a structure that's been around for thousands of years. And we kind of go back to the Greeks and the tragedies and the comedies, and the way we kind of even view stories in these types of categories. And we think about the story so much in three acts. We think about the hero's journey. All of these ideas are just critical reflections of, getting back to what Gunnar was talking about, the ethos, that this is the natural way the brain works. And the reason why stories work is because they work the way the brain works. And I think about this in terms of how...
Thank you for watching. Are you enjoyed the video? Let us know in the comment section. My mission is to help professionals like you to own their story. What would that do for you, you might ask? Well, it helps you make your competition irrelevant. Want to learn more? Check out our signature program, Own Your Story, a 5-week training to reshape your narrative. The link is what you see on your screen, academy.aclasses.org/story. Now back to the conversation.
A story can hang around for thousands of years. And we can, again, going back to the Greek stories, where was I? Somewhere in Southeast Asia doing a presentation. And I just casually used the reference to Achilles' heel. And they had no idea what I was talking about, and this idea that we all know this Greek story of Achilles being held by his heels and dunked in his pool that made him invulnerable, except for on his heel, was not shared by that group. But we do this all the time when stories that we share have this trait to them, that we can connect and we get the emotional connection to it. And so the story of the Good Samaritan, still guides our idea of moral behavior and exposes the hypocrisy of people who have positions of supposed respect and yet don't act in a way that comports with what we think is moral behavior. And all of this is so critical because our unconscious mind is processing, kind of the metaphor here is it processes about 11 million bits of information per second, while the conscious brain can only handle 50 bits of information per second. And so when our unconscious mind is shaped, it's shaped by our culture, it's shaped by our family, it's shaped by our personal experiences. And that that shaping is how we react to what we see, how we react to the world. When you travel to different countries, you see the different groups of people within that country and how they are treated and how they're viewed, and all of that happens at this very, very fast unconscious level. And then the conscious mind has a tendency to post hoc rationalize what the unconscious brain is feeding it. And so the Marsha's story I really found fascinating. I've done a lot of work in the healthcare fields, a lot of work with pharmaceutical companies, and one of the most important things I found in these narratives and trying to get people to be compliant with treatment is a lot of times there's not feedback that reinforces that behavior. So if you have high blood pressure and you're told to take a statin, doesn't make you feel better. As a matter of fact, it makes you feel worse. And if I don't have a what I call a behavioral belief that is good for me in a real way, then typically I'll become non-compliant. And these stories, these ideas of these stories that are held at this unconscious level, where I have this model in my mind of how things work. And I think that was going back to Gunner's talk about Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I always kind of felt like that was just a great example of creating a behavioral belief about a way to present information that makes it much more impactful. And it gets much more about, I can put all of those independent how components to the story or what components of the story much more coherently around a story of why. And when we think about telling good stories, and this is one of the oldest narratives we've ever found, which was from cave paintings. And tens of thousands of years ago, people were communicating via stories, via narratives, and that the power of that is linked into how the brain tries to structure our understanding of the world, how it tries to understand reality. And we can use narratives and metaphors to connect the intuitive unconscious mind to the executive conscious mind. And we use words, I think a lot of times we've been told words like rational and irrational, and I feel like these are not well framed to understand what's really going on. These are two complementary systems in our mind. The unconscious mind processing all of these experiences without numbers and without words, and can only express itself through feelings and emotions. And we take that then, and the rational mind often will just accept what the unconscious mind is coming up with. But it can't really grasp it, can't really do anything with it until it puts it into a narrative. And that's what the rational part of the brain is doing. And when you have a way to communicate, which is with a story or with a metaphor, you're connecting those parts of the brain in a way that's incredibly powerful, and it's the way to have a lasting impact. And whether that's with your personal brand, your personal story, whether that's with how you want to communicate to your children, how you want to communicate things to change social policy. As Marcia was talking about, her experiences with with patients and getting them to tell narratives to really create, I think, a hero's journey for what they're going through. And so that's why I think it's really important that we understand that we're just getting a much deeper understanding with neuroscience and cognitive psychology, what writers have known for thousands of years about the power and the need for stories, especially when we're trying to create culture, we're trying to create community, we're trying to create tribes. And that's so I know we're kind of running late, so I'll just kind of leave with this last slide of just connections to me. If anybody's interested in the white paper, which is The Force of Habit, let me know. I'd be happy to send it to you. It's kind of a 30-page paper that sort of explains the model of customer behavior that I developed, which I think is really useful for telling good stories. And so that's it for me. I know we covered a lot. If there are any questions, let me know.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Of course, we're going to get some questions. Why not? Anyway, since you are there, let's just start with you. I've got a couple of questions I would like you to help us clarify. One is, what is the best way to use neuroscience and cognitive psychology in marketing? I mean, I know you have sort of touched it, but I want you to expand on that a bit. But anyway, we're not seeing you. I think this time we need to see your face.
Yeah, if we get somebody to do something, that changes their mind much more than if we get them to think something. And so my focus on behavior, and I'm working on a book right now which I call integrated behavioral marketing, which is the idea that all behavior is about all marketing is about influencing behavior. And so you have to think the model was really created, this idea of a systematic way to understand current behavior, and realizing, most new products fail, most new restaurants fail, most companies fail, and they fail because they don't appreciate the behavioral inertia that must be overcome for someone to change how they get something done. I mean, if I came to your house, if you invited me to your house and I came over and I said, gee, I really think you should try a different salad dressing. It's like, why are you in my house? Why are you trying to change what I do? I've already solved that problem. I don't want to have to solve that problem again. And that's what marketers are doing all the time. They're completely disrespectful of the fact that we've already solved that problem, and that they want us to do something that will benefit them. And so there's a continuous cacophony of noise of people trying to get me to change my behavior without understanding what my behavior is and whether or not their solution is better or worse for me. They don't care. They're just trying to sell me something. So if we focus on how do I get behavior changed in a way that's beneficial to that person, that they will experience it as a benefit, then my solution sells itself. Otherwise, I'm constantly having to sell and badger my customers. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Of course, it works. If it doesn't work, we shouldn't be here talking of the behavior change now in the customer. Now, you see a company or a brand who want to sell. Of course, if you're a business, it means you want to sell. You want to change also the behavior of the people using the power of storytelling. In this case now, understanding it from the point of view of neuroscience. I'm trying to understand how it works. Could you share more on that?
Sure. Okay, I'll give you an example I use. When Delta, I live in Atlanta, so I fly out of the Atlanta airport. So Delta's my primary airline. They wanted to change my behavior. They wanted me to check in via the kiosk rather than standing in line and talking to a person. And so they offered me, 500 or 1,000 frequent flyer miles if I would use the kiosk. So that's how they initiated my behavior change. That's how they got me to do something different, by giving me a bribe. But the bribe wasn't the reason to use it, right? In other words, I had to have a good experience using the kiosk. When I used it, it was much faster. It saved me a lot of time. It was great. So that changed what I did and then reinforce it so I would do it again. Similarly, when they then went to an app, they did the same process. They gave me an incentive to try it, and then the app itself created a better experience for me. I was working with a very large pet food company, and they wanted people to start using more canned food. Now, the reason why is because they were going to make more money. They had no understanding of the customer. I came in and I showed them that most people find canned dog food disgusting. And they had videos that they had looked at, but they didn't understand what they were seeing. Again, from a behavioral perspective, you look at this. Paul Ekman did this work on micro expressions. You see this instantaneous reaction people had to this canned dog food. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to smell it. They didn't want it to touch any of their countertops. And that behavior, I was like, look, this is a dead project. This is not going to work. You can't overcome this. And when I asked them, how is this better for your customer? Crickets. No, they had no benefit for the customer. It was just going to be more profitable to them. And so these are the kinds of things people do. I find with great regularity that if they understood neuroscience and understood what you're trying to do is to create a new neural circuitry in the brain. And my book Habit is really about this, that we want to create habitual behavior because it doesn't take any extra effort. If you make me think, you're already irritating me. If you make me think a lot, forget it. Why are you making it so hard? And that that the quote that I didn't read out, but that was on the that third slide, that there is this universal law. I mean, it is the one universal law we've discovered, which is the law of least effort. And if I'm going to repeat a task, I'm going to try to make it as effortless as possible. And so many times we just, marketers fail to understand the amount of effort that has to happen before someone changes a behavior. But the success of, if I do it this way, if I know how to do it this way, and I do it automatically and I don't have to think about it, that frees my brain up to handle things that are more important.
Thank you so much for that. That is really valuable. It's really valuable. I appreciate that. All right, don't worry. We are coming to you because I have another question to ask you. And of course, I will ask you also, how can people connect with you? It's going to be a short moment for you to advertise yourself. That is in the final part for you. But anyway, you just hang on.